and welcome to our conversation. And I'm curious to know about the top things we need to remember while we're interviewing someone. Thank you so much for joining in, and I'm eagerly waiting to hear from you.
It's my pleasure, Rashmi. Thank you for having me. So yes, this is an interesting question and something I'm deeply interested in. So I think interviewing, the first thing we need to know is that it's a technical skill, just like any other technical skill that you might have to learn if to do a job well. The problem though is that many companies, many organizations don't realize that this is a technical skill that needs to be learned. And they assume that the higher you go, the more senior you are in your organization, you automatically become a good interviewer as well. And that's not necessarily true, right? So having established that, I think the first thing I would suggest for interviewers to remember is that whenever you interview to select, don't interview to reject. Okay. And what this means is, I'm going to ask you, for example, have you ever been in an interview where you felt that the interviewer was just trying to trap you?
Yeah, I remember my degree interview where I was trying to learn an English course, and the English professors were interviewing me, and it felt like they were waiting for me to fail.
Yes, yeah. Exactly, right? So many times as interviewers, and I've been guilty of this as well, we go into an interview and just wait for the candidate to make their first mistake. And then we feel that, okay, they've made their first mistake, the strike one, and then we wait for the next mistake. And all we are doing is really looking out for those mistakes so that the candidate might fail the whole interview round. And that's a big waste of time, not only for you, for your organization, but also for the candidate. Okay, so it's really important that while conducting the interview, you don't just start focusing on the mistakes that the candidate is making, but really find out what the candidate knows, right? So that's the first tip I would give. The second one I would talk about is biases and their impact on the interviewing outcome. I think we all know how biases can really affect an interview, and we all have biases. There's no way to avoid them. So my tip is not to avoid biases, but to become aware of them. Okay? You may not become aware of them while you're interviewing, but to become aware, especially while you're looking at the data gathered from the interview and when you're making a decision, ask yourself the question, is this coming from bias, this decision, or right, is there enough data to support it?
Right. And what would be one of the ways where this biases show up?
Yes. So one of the biggest source of biases are CVs. Okay. If you think about a CV, it's got a whole bunch of information which is going to cause bias, okay? Starting from the name itself, right? Yeah. And when I look at a name, I'm already thinking, oh, what gender is this person? Where's this person from? What community do they belong to? And there are certain, whether we admit to it or not, there are certain things that happen in our brain where we are starting to take some decisions, right? So the name is one source. You can't avoid that in a CV, unfortunately. Some companies ask for where you were born, or your birth date, or which country you're from, etc. And again, all of those can become huge sources of bias. Now, I'm not saying that you make it a rule that you don't ask for any of this information. Sometimes you might need it, but you have to be aware that all of these can cause bias. And if you go further, there are other sources of bias in the CV itself. For example, which educational institution you've studied in, which companies have you worked in, how many years of work experience you have, what are your interests and hobbies. All of these can cause bias. And this is something that one needs to be really aware of. And I'm going to say something really controversial here, which is that the best interview would be one which is conducted without having looked at the CV at all. Yeah. Now, I'm not advocating it. Yeah, I know it's really uncomfortable to do so, but it would be really good if actually people did not have all that information, which could lead to bias.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lana, for those tips on interviewing itself. I think they're very useful insights for us. And thank you for joining the conversation.
Thank you. My pleasure.